Hello, my name's Carwyn Jones, and I'm going to be hosting a series of podcasts where I interview the movers and shakers of the Welsh economy, those people who run businesses, those people who develop policy, and I'll be asking them what brought them into business, what drives them, and of course what their vision is for their business and for Wales. I'm joined today by Paul Miller, our first guest. Paul is the Cabinet Member for Economic Development at Pembrokeshire County Council. Paul, you are the first guest on this series of podcasts. One of the things, of course, that people often ask is, how did you get to where you were? What's your background? So tell us a bit about the journey that you've taken to becoming the Cabinet Member.
So, hi Carwyn, first of all, and I didn't realise I was the first guest, so I'm honoured indeed. I guess my journey into politics started about 7 or 8 years ago with a very small thing, sort of facilities in my hometown that weren't sort of at the level I'd like to see them be. That brought me into politics, and before you knew it, that brought me into the cabinet. Now, my sort of real job, for want of a better phrase, is in the sort of economic regeneration and housing space as a consultant, and that led in 2017 to the leader asking me to take the cabinet post for economic development at Pembrokeshire County Council. I was born and raised in Neyland in Pembrokeshire, and so it's not very far from home.
Very good. You mentioned there that you've been involved in various regeneration projects. Can you give us an idea of what you've done in the past and how those projects have improved the areas that they were based in?
Yeah, and I guess that's what's always driven me, really, sort of both in my professional career and my political career, is about changing the places that we all enjoy living in. So spent a lot of time working in Aylesbury, completely transforming their town centre there, £100 million capital programme to reshape Aylesbury town centre, doing a lot of work now in West London with a number of authorities and some really big schemes in London, as you can imagine, sort of 350 million plus GDV schemes, which I'd love to bring back to Pembrokeshire. That's probably not going to happen anytime soon. But nonetheless, there are lots of lessons to be learned about proactive public sector authorities who are making things happen. And certainly that's what I want to bring to Pembrokeshire.
Good, thanks. If we could move on then to Pembrokeshire itself. Now, of course, for a lot of people, they'll associate Pembrokeshire with oil refining. Valero, of course, is still there. With the ferry services from Pembroke Dock and from Fishguard. And also, of course, with tourism. Now, I'm sure there are many other strings to Pembrokeshire's bow, but if we could look at those three areas first. If we look at refining, of course, there were at one time, I think, 5 refineries in and around the Haven. But how important is Valero to the economy of South Pembrokeshire?
So absolutely critical. And you're right to highlight the sort of long-term decline of oil refining in Pembrokeshire. Now, to a very small extent, some of that's been replaced by different industry. So obviously RWE built their 2 gigawatt power station in Pembroke in the not too distant past, and there's been some LNG investment in Pembrokeshire, but none of those installations have brought the jobs and the added value that refineries bring with them. They're just much more intensive operations. I saw a report probably 5 years ago from the Petroleum Industry Association talking about a 3-4-5 refinery model in the UK. We need to make absolutely sure that that refinery stays viable and continues providing the jobs and adding the value to the supply chain in the local economy. I would add to your list, by the way, agriculture as well. Those are the 3 things really for Pembrokeshire: agriculture, energy and tourism. And you're right that they do currently underpin Pembrokeshire's economy. There's not a lot beyond that of significant value.
You mentioned, of course, Valero. Not so long ago, Merco closed down as a refinery, still being used as a storage area, if I remember rightly. What sort of effect did the Merco closure have on the other side of the Haven and beyond?
An enormous impact. So you're quite right, it is a tank storage facility, but effectively when Merco was operational, I should say vested interest in that. Every single member of my family has worked at one or other of the refineries in the recent past, including myself. You've replaced effectively Merco Oil Refinery that operated with sort of 300-400 full-time employees, probably averaging 50 grand a year, plus a huge number in the supply chain and contractors, with a tank storage facility that I bet doesn't employ 50 people at 50 grand a year. That's the difference. And you take that sort of cash out of the local economy, it hurts and people notice. And I guess that's one of the things that we'll cover later is Pembrokeshire's in its position now because of what has historically been there. So the energy industry has underpinned the county for a long time. There's no question about that. Is it going to continue underpinning the county in the long term? Probably not, or certainly not without the next generation of investment and the different type of energy industry underpinning it. So the challenge for me is about how we support Pembrokeshire make that transition to what the future looks like. And I guess we'll talk about that in a bit later.
We will, and you're right to mention agriculture. We'll touch on that in a moment. And fisheries, of course. I think Milford Haven is the busiest fishing port in Wales, and Saundersfoot is the fourth busiest, so clearly important to the local economy. If we could move on now, of course, then to the ferry links. Pembroke Dock, of course, takes a lot of freight over to Ireland. Fishguard, mainly people. What do you think are the difficulties and opportunities that exist in both those ports?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really interesting question. So I think both of those crossings are viable, so the companies that operate them tell us, but I don't think particularly profitable routes. There are two of them, obviously, and I think it's easy to see how those routes become rationalised. So it's easy to see how one of Pembroke Dock or Fishguard become the long-term ferry route out of Pembroke into Ireland. I don't know when that'll happen, but certainly there's constant pressure on those routes. You're right, threat in terms of jobs lost, connectivity lost. Opportunity also, though, in terms of perhaps beefing up the infrastructure to one or other of those ports that could have a significant positive connectivity impact for the rest of Pembrokeshire. So threat and opportunity, absolutely. And of course, you know, it wouldn't be a sort of business interview in the UK at the moment without a quick mention to Brexit. Threats and opportunities there too in terms of connectivity with Ireland.
You seem to be suggesting there that you can see a time when there will be one port. I'm not going to ask you to name which one, but there will be one port that effectively will be the ferry gateway to Wales from Ireland. Of course, Fishguard at one time had a Seacat service, a fast ferry that didn't last particularly long because of fuel costs. How do you see the ferry services developing in the future? Do you think there's scope for other routes? Is there scope for perhaps more freight going through ports like Fishguard? What do you think the future of the ferry ports will be in that regard?
So this isn't a strong subject of mine, but I mentioned threats and opportunities from Brexit, and they are there. So it's very difficult to predict how that will all pan out, and I guess the eventual deal around our departure from the EU will very much determine that. But is there an opportunity for Pembrokeshire to be more of a gateway to Europe? Yes, I think potentially there is, subject to what deal gets done. And certainly we have done some planning around what land is available in and around our ports, what support we might be able to give to potential operators were they to look to run additional routes from ports in Pembrokeshire. And really, until we've got some clarity on what that Brexit deal might look like, it's very difficult to predict what the future looks like. However, we have made some steps to make sure Pembrokeshire is ready.
You mentioned agriculture, and I mentioned fisheries. Now, Pembrokeshire, of course, is particularly well known for its potatoes and also for its turkeys at Christmas. I know it's about far more than that. But what do you think are the threats and the opportunities for agriculture in the county?
So threats all about Brexit, and I don't want this interview to be all about Brexit, so I'll cover that briefly in that, look, you know, changing subsidy landscape with our exit from the European Union has the potential to be very damaging for Pembrokeshire's farmers who rely in large part on the Common Agricultural Policy. Having said that, some opportunities. For me, it's all about the provenance of food, so lots of talk about that, lots of people very interested on that, and that's something that we are supporting. So you mentioned sort of turkeys and potatoes. There's two great companies in Capestone and
Puffin.
Puffin, yeah. Thank you, Carwyn.
No, I've been to Puffin. One of the things I noticed when I went to Puffin some years ago now was that they take potatoes, they clean them, and then they sprinkle some soil over the top before putting them back in the bag. And I remember asking them some years ago now, why is it that you do that? And they said, well, these particular buyers, their customers want to see a little bit of soil, but not mud on the potatoes. It's incredible what people are asked to do, what suppliers are asked to do for the big supermarkets.
But those two guys we've just mentioned there, Capestone and Puffin, are fantastic examples of organisations who've got together. Let's take the Puffin example. Got together a number of farmers in Pembrokeshire as growers, and they've driven themselves up the supply chain. So let's not just supply the potatoes. Why don't we wash and bag them? And then from there, why don't we cut them up into something else or make something out of them? And before you know it, much more of the value add of agriculture is starting to happen in Pembrokeshire. It's starting to create jobs, both in the supply chain and actually permanent jobs in those facilities. Now, we and Welsh Government in partnership are doing a lot with Puffin and others about how can we get more of that value add to happen in Pembrokeshire. So Puffin have got some big expansion plans. We've acquired and assembled some land in association with Welsh Government around Withybush for what we're calling a food park. And it's all about saying, well, yeah, great, we grow a lot of things in Pembrokeshire. Why don't we do some of the making of those things as well?
No, that was always, of course, the case with Welsh farming, that we were primary producers and money was added somewhere else. And it's been great to see that change over the years. If we look at the fishing sector, Milford is by far our biggest port in Wales. What opportunities, I know that Brexit, of course, is the big threat. We've touched on that already. But what opportunities might there be to develop Milford as a port, not just perhaps for fisheries, but more generally in the future?
So we're working hard with partners at Milford Haven Port Authority on their vision for Pembroke Port. And on the one hand, that's where the ferry comes in and out of, but actually it's a lot more than that. And the Port of Milford Haven very rightly recognised the major opportunity from clean, renewable, green energy. And there have been lots of sort of discussions and activities, thinking particularly about City Deal, around how we might position Pembroke to best support that sort of marine, green, renewable infrastructure that we need in Wales. So part of the City Deal is around investing in port infrastructure in Pembroke. I won't bore you with the detail, but sheds and slipways and electrical connections and all of the infrastructure that you need to be ready for the revolution that we know is coming. And we're very supportive of the Port of Milford Haven's vision for Pembroke.
Okay, thank you for that. Tourism, of course, very, very big in the economy of the whole of Pembrokeshire. And of course, we know that over the years, we've seen many parts of Wales looking to project particular messages about why people should come to different areas. What do you think Pembrokeshire has to offer? And what do you think Pembrokeshire needs to do in the future to make sure that it continues to attract tourists to the area?
Tourism is a major sector for Pembrokeshire, and a significant part of our spend each year comes from the tourism holiday period of sort of, if you stretch it a bit, from May through till about September, maybe October. So a key challenge for us is about how we broaden that season, so how we make those shoulder periods busier, how we encourage more visitors through the door. On the face of it, though, you'd think tourism was doing fantastically well in Pembrokeshire, and it is in places, but overall in Pembrokeshire, tourism spend over the last 10 years declined by 5% in real terms. So it's a challenge too. And I think part of it is how we collectively market Pembrokeshire as a destination. So there's a number of disparate actors in Pembrokeshire on tourism doing different things to promote Pembrokeshire as a destination. And the challenge for us is how to bring that all together into a single, succinct message, selling Pembrokeshire as a destination. Well, we're working on a project now to set up a new organisation, a genuine partnership between all of the people interested in selling Pembrokeshire as a destination to do that. One organisation, one set of funding, one set of objectives to make sure that Pembrokeshire is considered by potential holidaymakers as far and wide as possible. And what we'll come on to later, I suspect, is our plan around regeneration for Pembrokeshire, and a key part of that is turning those visitors, not all of them, very small percentage of them, but turning a very small percentage of those visitors into people who can genuinely see how they don't just visit Pembrokeshire, but they might choose to live and work in Pembrokeshire as well.
And some exciting developments. I was in Saundersfoot not long ago and saw the new developments in the harbour there. So great potential, of course, for Saundersfoot, and I'm sure for many other coastal towns and villages as well. If I could ask you, in terms of the future of tourism, what do you think in particular would be useful for Pembroke? Would be useful for Pembrokeshire to illustrate to people? If I was a tourist and I asked you, why would I come to Pembrokeshire? What has it got to offer? What would your response be?
So if you were a tourist, I'd say to you, it's about the most beautiful part of the UK and one of the most beautiful parts of the world. We're the UK's only coastal national park. And And the landscape in Pembrokeshire is incredible. The wildlife in Pembrokeshire is incredible. The people in Pembrokeshire are incredible. And to be honest, I don't think it would take much to sell you on a visit to Pembrokeshire. The real challenge for us, and the real challenge for me, is how we sell it to people as a place to live and work and not just to visit. So I'm going to start talking about our regeneration aspirations now.
If I could just stop you for a second, before we'll go on to that before long. But let's look at the hidden gems, as it were, of business in Pembrokeshire. One of the objectives of Business News Wales is to let people know what's happening, not just in their own area, but around Wales. We have businesses all around Wales that are doing remarkable things, and quite often people don't know about it. In Pembrokeshire, what sort of businesses would you want to point to as businesses that have got great potential for the future, and perhaps businesses that people outside Pembrokeshire wouldn't know about?
So you're right, there are lots of businesses in Pembrokeshire doing fantastic things that probably no one knows anything about. Clearly, we've world-leading engineering organisations in Pembrokeshire, all based around Valero Refinery, but a number of those are genuinely world-leading engineering companies running projects right across the UK, as well as servicing Valero. On top of that, we talked about Merco earlier. Well, the Merco spin-off, Insight, engineers from Merco set up their own business, now providing engineering expertise to oil refineries around the world. Fantastic example of what can come from a bit of a disaster in Merco closing. We talked about Puffin earlier. They're another great example of a company that are taking a Pembrokeshire product and adding that value in Pembrokeshire. So you're absolutely right. There's a lot of great things happening. The future, well, that's got to be around the digital revolution, I think. And again, there are some examples of companies doing interesting things in Pembrokeshire, but that's probably where we need to focus our support and our energy in growing some more of those businesses and in growing the ones that are there.
And of course, there's been a lot of development in the field of renewable energy, hasn't there, in Pembrokeshire, with both wind and tidal power. What's the situation at the moment with that sector?
So I think it's a real opportunity. Obviously, UK, Welsh Government policies are all pointing in the sort of carbon neutral direction. That means that we need to decarbonise our grid, and that means we need to look at renewable energy. Now, there are a couple of technologies that are particularly interesting for Pembrokeshire, probably offshore and particularly floating offshore wind, and as well as that sort of wave and tidal power. Now, there have been companies who've tested prototypes in Pembrokeshire. Bombora are around at the moment testing or planning to test prototypes. And our job, I think, as sort of government in Pembrokeshire, is to make sure that the conditions are right for those companies to want to use Pembrokeshire as their test bed. So City Deal is talking about creating a marine energy test zone out just off the Pembrokeshire coast. We're looking at investment in Pembroke Port to make it easy to land those facilities, to make those facilities. And you start to join it all up. You've got world-leading engineering companies currently servicing the oil refinery. Well, actually, same engineering skills are needed to build the next generation of renewable kit. You've got the Port of Pembroke, which currently services the oil refineries, but actually you need the same sort of facility to land, maintain, operate your marine renewable equipment. So there's a real opportunity for Pembrokeshire to position itself as a world leader in marine renewables, and that's something that we're working on.
Let's look at the future then. What is the future for the Pembrokeshire economy, and where do you think there needs to be particular work when it comes to regeneration?
So I've been Cabinet Member in Pembrokeshire for just over 2 years now, and I think it's fair to say that the previous administration weren't big on regen, and that's a perfectly legitimate political choice. They decided that they were going to do other things, and that's fine. Since taking post, I've been very clear that the Pembrokeshire economy needs our support. And we're absolutely crystal clear that we are going to provide that support. So we've allocated some significant funding, and we've geared the organisation up to properly support economic development and regen in Pembrokeshire. Now, very crudely, I'd articulate our strategy in 3 parts. 1 is connectivity, 2 is offering something, and 3 is being discovered. In terms of connectivity, my ambition is that we are the best connected rural county in the UK in terms of digital connectivity. So we are in the process of recruiting a number of officers to become broadband engagement officers. We're in the process of securing what I hope will be significant funding. Hopefully there'll be an announcement in a month or so about that. And we are going to drive out fibre to the premises broadband in a way that no one else in Wales has done. And we're going to spend some serious money and effort and time in doing that, because digital connectivity is key to what Pembrokeshire can become in the future. So the other thing we talk about and debate a lot is about job creation. Yes, that's very important, but actually the world is changing. So I look at my own circumstances as a consultant. I live and work in Pembrokeshire, and I travel to London maybe 2 or 3 days a week. That's perfectly doable. It wasn't 10 years ago. The technology wasn't quite there. It didn't work, but it does now. So that brings me on to the third part of our economic regen plan. It's about being discovered, and that's where we talked about tourism earlier. So how do we persuade a very small percentage of those hundreds of thousands of visitors who visit Pembrokeshire to say, actually, I could live and work here? It doesn't matter where their job is. It doesn't matter where they're being paid from. The fact is, if they're living in Pembrokeshire and earning their money somewhere else, that's absolutely fine, because they're spending it in Pembrokeshire and they're supporting the Pembrokeshire economy. The middle plank of that then is key. So we are offering something in terms of the natural environment, but what we're not really offering is that sort of built environment that people want to enjoy. So if you live in a city, or even in the suburbs, or even in sort of the surrounding towns of a big city, you've got lots of the amenities that people want to live around, shops and cinemas and restaurants, and none of that really exists in Pembrokeshire. Our town centres have been allowed to wither on the vine, and that's something that we're going to do as well. Is we're really going to get stuck in and transform the fortunes of some of our key towns. So we're going to spend a lot of time and money on Pembroke and Haverfordwest in particular. Some people who follow Pembrokeshire will have seen that there's been some debate recently about us acquiring shopping centres and old shops. Well, I'm going to make no apology for that. We're going to do it, and we're going to do it aggressively. Pembrokeshire County Council is going to take an ownership stake in those town centres, and we are going to force a transformation into that leisure space. So where a town centre used to be just shops, well, we all recognise the world is changing. We need that leisure offer in Pembrokeshire, particularly given our tourist sector, that wet weather leisure opportunity. And we're going to make sure that Pembroke and Haverfordwest offer that. So you take those three things together, offering something in terms of the natural world, tick. Offering something in terms of the built environment, a big no at the moment, but we're determined to do something about it. Digital connectivity, like I said, we want to be the best connected rural county in the UK, and we're going to drive fibre to the premises broadband out right across the county. That's going to be a sort of tens of millions investment, and we're going to make it, and we're clear that we're going to make it. And then finally, that destination marketing. So how do we get people to say, yeah, I visited Pembrokeshire, it's wonderful and beautiful, but actually I could live there too? You put those three things together and we think we've got a formula that will really transform Pembrokeshire's fortunes.
Which of the developing sectors in the economy do you think have the most potential to grow in Pembrokeshire? We've talked about some of the more long-standing industries, but of the ones that you see in your role, what are those areas that excite you in terms of areas that could really grow in the future?
Well, so I think we've talked about all of them in the round. So provenance of food is a really big thing, yeah. So adding value in that agricultural supply chain, bringing more of that value into Pembrokeshire, I think is a real opportunity. Renewable energy, I think, is a huge opportunity, and there's no reason at all why the Port of Pembroke can't be the UK's leading sector for marine renewable energy. No reason at all that it can't. But also, like I said, I've got a bit more of a relaxed view about job creation. I also see the world changing about people working and living in a disconnected way. So they live remotely from where they work. And I think that's a key opportunity for Pembrokeshire. You could buy yourself a one-bedroom flat in London for £500,000 and walk into work. Or you could buy yourself a small castle in Pembrokeshire for £500,000. You could connect yourself to fibre to the premises broadband at a gigabit, and you could do everything you need to do apart from the 1 day a week you need to spend in London, or the 1 day a fortnight you need to spend in London. And I'm very interested in getting those people to consider living in Pembrokeshire, because it doesn't matter that their job isn't in Pembrokeshire. They're earning that money, they're bringing it back in a sack to Pembrokeshire, and they're spending it in the local economy. And to my mind, that's good news.
You're quite right about that. Bizarrely, of course, if they earn their money elsewhere, they're seen as having a negative effect on the GDP, which you and I both know is not the reality of it, but that's the way these statistics are calculated. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. I am an investor, who is looking to invest in Pembrokeshire. If I came to you and I said to you, why should I come to Pembrokeshire? What is your USP? What would your answer be?
So partly it's what we already offer. World-class engineering operations, a port facility that no one else has, a breathtaking natural world. But really what I'd say to you is come because of what Pembrokeshire can be. You've got an administration in Pembrokeshire now who's absolutely determined to make that economy grow. Come in, knock on my door, let's have a conversation about how we can facilitate land, how we can facilitate investment, how we can support your enterprise to grow. There'll be nowhere in Wales that is more supportive of people generating employment, generating jobs than Pembrokeshire.
Paul, it's been a great pleasure to have hosted you on the podcast today, and the very best of luck to you in the future, and of course to Pembrokeshire. Some exciting opportunities there that we've discussed. Paul Miller, Cabinet Member for Economic Development at Pembrokeshire County Council. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Carwyn.